Hello and good morning. I'm Duncan, CORRIGAN, and I'd like to begin my talk by acknowledging that much of my work, this talk included, is created on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to its traditional owners. Sovereignty was never ceded, and the violence of colonial structures and policies are ongoing. So hello, and thank you for coming to my talk about sparking playful ambition. Just a quick introduction. My name is Duncan CORRIGAN, and I'm a game designer and artist working in Melbourne. I make mostly small games with friends, though more recently I've been making some solo work that's more inquiry-driven, mostly exploring what it means to play and how we inspire playfulness in each other. I also help co-run Serenade with my friends Qual Moreno, George Mack, Kaveh Tabar, and Jay Stewart. We're like a Sydney-focused collective that hosts game exhibits, highlighting the weird and heartfelt. We've been doing events since 2020, and our current event is a sort of a Game a Week program that we've been running over, that we're going to be running over 5 weeks. And for those who have been paying close attention, you'll also notice, yes, that's me on the skateboard as well. So here's just a quick overview of what I'm covering today. So starting with this idea of our shared ideologies of play, so where they come from and how they perhaps surreptitiously influence how we engage with the world around us. Then kind of looking at what an interrogation of these ideas looks like and how it might change the way we think about making games, and finally touching on maybe a more holistic goals of a post-conventional embracement of play that might help us transcend social and political structures that we may feel trapped in. So, what does it mean to play? Woof. Huge question. Do I really want to start my talk with such a big question? Well, this is me in 2019 speaking at a games conference in Melbourne, trying to answer that exact question. And here I am as a baby. That's my mother, and she's lifting me up against some white flowers. And here I am with my sisters and my dad, and we're just playing on a playground. And here I am as a sexy air hostess with legs for days. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that what it means to play is not actually super relevant here. In Brian Sutton Smith's Ambiguity of Play, he posits that play is vague and possibly easier to describe than define. And I think this feels pretty right. Because I think unless you're maybe a games academic, play is probably more readily described than defined. Or observed, that is to say, you know it when you see it. And embodied, you know it when you feel it. So we all have a kind of sense of what it means to play or what it looks like. So instead I ask, how do we, that is you and I, form our ideas of what it means to play? And what effect do those formal ideas have on our practice of it? So, video games perhaps represent the most privatized ideal of play, and as a mainstream medium, the video game marketplace, along with other entertainment marketplaces, perpetuate an ideology of play that is necessarily commodified, and thus stress artifacts or constructs as requisites for play. That is to say, we are led to believe there is no play without a game. Stephanie Bullock and Patrick Lemieux talk about this fetishization of commodities in their book, Metagaming. and how it obfuscates our practice of play. So they proposed the biggest trick the game industry ever pulled on us was convincing people video games were games in the first place, when they aren't. They're tools, toys, and instruments that we use to make metagames. So we play a vital role in making games, but we may not be aware that we do, and thus those formal structures surrounding those games crystallize into our ideology of play. On the design side then, we can get into this kind of formalism. If we're attributing our practice of play to specific forms, a lot of effort is going to be poured into realizing that form at a greater fidelity. And you can see this kind of formalism and homogeny in AAA game spaces, for example. No shade, but maybe a little bit of shade. Lastly, with ideologies of play so heavily tied to artifacts and constructs, our practice of play becomes entwined in bodies of power, be it capital-driven or political. So, as an analogy, I invite everybody to picture a playground, a government council-approved playground. When we play on the equipment, I'd argue that our practice of play is pretty nuanced and often subversive. In fact, I'd argue that perhaps our most memorable and transformative experiences occur when we find new and unconventional ways of interacting with the equipment. Running up that slide for the first time, or jumping from the swings. Yet, at the end of the day, the form of the playground remains unchanged. So we can see how all those multitudes of experience, all that nuance, may wrongly become attributed to its specific form. So when we understand play, we then come to understand play in this formal way. Swings, slides, and monkey bars. Okay, what does this all mean for us, though? Why does it matter if our idea of play stresses artifacts? Well, I think there's two main consequences of this. Firstly, our ideologies of play have a real influence on the ways we play, on our practice of it. Secondly, as designers, how we think of play influences the kinds of artifacts we think we can make. So, focusing on the personal impact first. We may come to attribute great play experiences to formal play structures and cease looking for opportunities for transformative experiences when outside of these formal structures. And thus, we may limit the time and occasion we spend playing because we have internalized that there isn't anything meaningful to be gained unless we're playing within formal structures. But the truth is, we don't need the playground to play. There is meaningful experiences to be gained all around us if we just tried to seek them out. This is a street in Melbourne, but it could just as easily be Wellington. The point being, we can find meaningful experiences in more spaces if we just approach them, recognizing our capacity to play beyond the playground. See, she gets it. And if you think we need structure to play, then explain what's happening here when we look out the car window. But as we do stress the artifact, the places we limit ourselves to play also often cost money. So things like going to a bar or bowling or karaoke, which is fine when you can afford it, but it is hugely demoralizing for those who can't, who may feel they cannot afford to play. And also, if we think of the playground as a space where we give ourselves permission to play, well, I'd ask, whose permission are we seeking exactly? So how we limit ourselves in play then is also a political matter. So Stuart Brand, one of the founders of the New Games movement in the 1960s, has this great quote reflecting on his experiences organizing protests for the Vietnam War. He was basically inviting protesters to play in public together. So playing in public in itself is a political act, especially in hard times. To get people together of different ages and cultures and languages and have them all enjoy each other and play games is so different from what was going on at the time. So playing in public opposes the status quo. It pushes against the invisible boundaries imposed on us by those in power, and it reveals a different way of being. So, how do these ideologies affect how we approach game making? Well, if we think of games as inherently playful artifacts, design becomes about realizing their form, further consolidating on what exists, but pushing for greater fidelity or a more realized version of it. Back to the playground analogy, it's like thinking that a playground must have slides and swings, because they are formal parts of this playful structure. So rather than introducing new and interesting forms of equipment, swings and slides are iterated upon, made bigger and fancier. However, there's a risk here. I mentioned earlier that I argued that our best memories with equipment were often subversive. So the real value of that equipment was in its looseness and flexibility for alternative use. So by making slides and swings more and more complex, they're actually at risk of losing that value. Perhaps we could see the ultimate version or the ultimate realization of their forms in a theme park. And while a roller coaster is perhaps more thrilling than a slide, it has removed the ability to subvert and play in, on, and around its form. Okay, so I have a rant incoming, and this is a sort of homage to Frank Lance's immersion fallacy. So I feel a defining element of play is the drive to approach an alternative reality, to find transformation and novelty by playing off conventional modes of being. So I feel there is a risk when our video games try so hard to present realities with greater fidelity and less friction. So, as an example, the humble game of Floor is Lava is perhaps best with no fidelity at all, because it's really just about encouraging a mindset that seeks to transform the world around you, to discover new ways of being and to revel in novel experience. However, there exists in this world Floor is Lava for adults, where the fidelity is increased so that it is quote-unquote more meaningful. So that fidelity exists in the literal representation of lava, but also in including fail states and win states. So there's less of an ask on players to tap into a playful mindset. They're just more willing to accept a reality if it's realized enough. So with an ideology that stresses artifacts and constructs and growing expectations for those things to deliver us a new reality without the need for our own creative imagination, we approach a world where the only realities that currently exist can exist, or new realities can only be pushed by those with enough power to deliver them fully resolved, like Silicon Valley telling us that AI is the future, or Western media conglomerates pushing a narrative to erase a genocide. And this really downplays our capacity to imagine a better world. So, we may want to interrogate our ideologies of play, de-emphasizing the artifact to recognize our role in play and our inherent capacity to play beyond formal play structures, untying our practices of play from capitalistic systems and political powers to discover more occasions, time, and places to play. Okay, so here's your chance. So I want you to interrogate one assumption you have about how you think you're expected to behave right now. And I want you to subvert it. Should you be sitting down? Should you be stationary? Should you be quiet? Should you be sitting there and not up on this stage with me? And go for it. Hello? Can I get it on mic? Hello? 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 Is that working? Okay, some crowd work time. Okay, I'm doing some crowd work. Who wants to be serenaded? Okay, I'm singling you out. Okay, do you like Pixar? Okay, this is the song I got for you. Remy the Ratatouille, the rat of all my dreams. How's your play-by-play going? How's your play-by-play going?
It's incredible.
How's yours?
Yeah, really good.
How are you going?
Wicked.
Awesome. Okay, would anybody like this? Yeah? If you don't mind hitting the next thing. Cool, moving on. I did think this through because now I can't see my slides, but I did write the rest out. All right, next slide. Okay, so this interrogation leads us to this idea. Video games aren't playful, people are playful. And I could do a whole other talk stressing the value of community and friends in uncovering new ways of being, like we just saw. But I digress. So what effect should this have on our approach to making games? Next slide. If games aren't an inherently playful object, then its ultimate potential lies in its ability to spark the playful ambition of a player. And I know this may seem like an innocuous distinction, but it does center the focus of design on people and not on further consolidating the fidelity of established forms of games. So how do we spark this playful ambition? Well, one thing we can do is present something novel, where there is a clear promise of transformative experience or new perspectives. And much like the playground equipment, looser forms were arguably more conducive for playful experimentation. So having some freedom and flexibility in your design for people to express their mode of play, so having some freedom and flexibility in your design for people to express their mode of play. I believe our most transformative and memorable experiences from games come from when we engage playfully to create and extend meaning beyond the formal structure of the game. So in inviting this behavior, we're creating real value for players as well. From here, we might start to think about ways our games can even help players interrogate ideologies of play, their own ideologies of play, should I say. So designing moments where they can observe the transformative effect of their playful expressions, avoiding excessive fidelity and formalism, allowing for slower modes of engagement for introspection, as the game designer Tracy Fullerton would put it, A slower pace aligns with the requisite time we need to know ourselves in play. To de-emphasize the artifact, we may also make work that subverts expectations and blurs the boundary of the proverbial magic circle. Next one. I experimented with some of these ideas in my own game. Cool. Moving on. That's a callback, and it's funny because that's the name of the game. Anyways, in Moving On has no objectives or active way to progress, and instead relies heavily on players to find their own meaning. It invites a slower pace and gives players a lot of opportunities to embody childish antics. So, in closing, I want to discuss the effect interrogating our ideologies of play might have in the rest of our lives. I feel that when we acknowledge our capacity to play beyond formal play structures, we realize we can transcend other structures in our lives too. We may begin to feel less trapped in our existing structures as we practice a way of re-envisioning the world around us, ultimately leading to more opportunities for connection with our communities, greater opportunities to gain new perspectives and understanding, and more moments of joy. Thank you.
What are some of the things you think the game development studios, companies, teams can do to embody play a bit more in their practices?
Yeah, so it's really tricky because, like, by their very structure, I think they're being made to sell to, like, large audiences. And so, wow, I'm out of breath. I can't necessarily say that, like, the decisions that they're making are, like, wrong, because it kind of serves their sort of design intention. However, I will say that, like, the idea of obviously chasing trends, like this idea of the formalism of understanding games as being like structured in a very particular way and needing to be structured in a very particular way to be accepted, I think it's pretty flawed, and we can see that in terms of like the games that become the big blowout successes are obviously trying something new. And so I think trusting that there is sort of something inherently valuable, there's inherent value to sort of novelty, I think is something that, if that was more embodied in a studio, I think that could make an impact.
As a studio, how do you embody play every day during your normal hours?
Sorry, as a studio? Like,
every day.
Yeah, so my thinking is that, like, play is maybe not a thing that you can be doing all the time. It's exhausting, but I think like most things, it's something that you can practice and get better at and get it's more readily available. I think in my own personal experience, the more I practice play, the more ready I was for it, because it's this mindset where you're like willing to accept unfamiliarity. In fact, you're seeking it out, where and that can be kind of a lot, where like sometimes if you just want to seek the familiar and relax and soothe, that's obviously very valid. But by doing it more, and that's by basically interrogating your ideologies of play to kind of recognize your capacity to play in like non-traditional play spaces. So like, for instance, finding a way to play at work. And what that means, like not thinking that play at work means having a work slide or a foam pit, because that's obviously bullshit. But it's really understanding what it means to play, and in this the thing that I'm arguing is it is seeking that unfamiliar and being open to meaningful experiences in more spaces. And yeah, the more you do that, and there are like very real like little games that you can play, like the New Games Movement has a bunch of games, or Bernie de Koven has a bunch of games that you can play that help just kind of let you do that more often throughout the day. And then the more you do that, the more easily it'll come as sort of your first instinct.
I've had a hard week. Can I just like howl like a wolf?
Yes.
Ow! 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 Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh, beautifully done.